Today we're going to talk about a guy named John Brown. It's about as ordinary and plain and simple of a name as you can possibly expect. But John Brown is a really interesting character in American history, and I kind of really like talking about him because he's so unique in what he does or what he's willing to do for the passion that he has for the things that he cares about. And John Brown is going to be an abolitionist. Somebody remind me what an abolitionist is or does? Somebody who has a passion to end slavery. And I would say that John Brown is a little bit different kind of abolitionist. I would say John Brown is an extreme abolitionist, which means it is like his thing. Nothing else matters in the world to him other than abolishing slavery. So if you are a black person in America studying U.S. history, looking for a white man in U.S. history that is a hero to you, it is this guy. So we're going to do kind of a comparison using John Brown and a little bit of how we look at things today or think about things today. This is really going to be annoying. I'm going to try to adjust this real quick. Oh, yay.
Oh my gosh, everyone's so excited.
Thanks for coming to school on time on the day when you get to sleep an extra hour anyway.
Well, it wasn't my fault.
Oh, it wasn't my fault my alarm didn't go off and my eyes didn't open.
It was my mother used it.
My mother's fault that I didn't get out of bed an hour and a half earlier than I should. Jeez. By the way, when you were gone, we spent most of our time talking about you, like personal stuff.
That's surprising. There's not much going on in my life.
Whatevs. That's not what. Okay, no, we didn't do that. That would be rude to talk about someone when they're not here. Anyway, so we're going to take a look at John Brown, the man, the myth, the legend, and hopefully get into something called violence in Congress, which is kind of interesting because in our government there isn't really a place for violence. The government or Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives are supposed to be a place where you can debate things, debate issues and topics without getting violent over them. We're supposed to be able to have what's called civil discourse, which means we can agree to disagree. That we can have two completely different opinions and not hit each other over the head because of our differences in opinion. And that's what makes America as strong as it is that we don't all have to agree on everything. There are some things that we are supposed to all agree on, but not all things. And if that happens, which is very, very rare, then things change, things happen. So we'll take a look, hopefully, at violence in Congress. To be honest with you, today's lesson is more of a full block lesson rather than a Friday PLC shortened period lesson. So we'll see how far we get on this. As I really don't know. I've never done it on a Friday PLC day. But this is one of my fave lessons. So I'm going back into the notes, and I'm going to go to this picture. So I think this, well, I'll back up a slide and just make sure we covered this. We talked about bleeding Kansas, and we talked about how Kansas was going to be allowed to determine their future, the future of slavery in Kansas, based on popular sovereignty. So popular sovereignty is a democratic way of choosing. Let the people vote. And if the people say slavery, then Kansas would be slave. But it's not supposed to be able to do that. Because of the Missouri Compromise, nothing north of 36 degrees 30 minutes north latitude was supposed to have slavery. And Kansas was north of that line. So Missouri Compromise would have said no slavery. Instead, we'll let everyone vote. It's not difficult. Popular sovereignty makes sense, especially when you have a one-issue thing. We can't have a democracy for a government every day because it doesn't work for 330 million people to vote on everything. But we could have a democracy in a small group. So in our class, if I said, all right, we're going to vote on lunch today. Should we have crispy chicken sandwiches from Chick-fil-A or should we have pizza from Casey's? And you guys are like, ooh, those both sound pretty tasty. And then we vote, and whoever has the most votes, that's what we're going with. Our government doesn't function that way very often, but that's the idea of popular sovereignty is the most votes win. So if Kansas says slavery, then Kansas is going to be slave. And that's where these 5,000 illegal voters from Missouri sneak into Kansas and cast their ballots. It would be like on election day if I go over to Missouri Valley and vote. That's not cool, because a Nebraska guy is not supposed to be able to vote in Iowa. In fact, I've told you before, and I'll probably repeat myself over and over, there's only one place I can go vote legally. There's only one place that will accept my ballot, and that's Reach Church for me, based on my, not having to do with religion, it's based on my address. And churches oftentimes are used for polling places during elections, because usually elections in Nebraska take place on Tuesdays. Not a whole lot going on in the church on a Tuesday. So it's a public place that's opened up and easy to access. They used to hold a lot of voting on election days in like school gymnasiums, but that doesn't work quite as well, because, well, especially today, we don't want a whole bunch of weirdos wandering around our school. We're kind of cautious about who we allow in, and if mom comes to visit, then she got to check in the office and get a visitor's pass. And imagine the pain in the neck that would cause when hundreds of people are coming in to vote. So it's easier to do it at places like churches or county facilities than it is at schools. But that's the only place I can go. So this wouldn't work today. Border ruffians or voting in a place that isn't your place to vote can't happen. I suppose you could go register to vote in that place just to try to throw things off. But if that's the case, I still have to show proof of residence. I have to prove that I live where I'm going to vote. Might be a little bit difficult. So when we get to this picture, here's what I want you to do. And this, is it clearer on your slideshow than it is on mine? By the way, I had some people the other day tell me that because I put in both versions of the notes, and that the written version isn't right. I have two versions of it. I can try to put the other one in if you guys really want me to, or we can just stick with this one. I don't care. I think I have the other version that is more accurate, like it follows just like chapter 14 did. So later, if I think about it, I'll put it in and you can choose. Is it easier to see the details in this on your screen than it is on my screen? About the same. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to, and you can do this by yourself or with a partner, and this isn't screw around time, it's not recess time, but I want you to get together with a person or just do it yourself, and somewhere either on your Chromebook, don't turn this in to me, but somewhere either on your Chromebook or just on a piece of scratch paper, I want you to try to write down, I'm going to give you 3.5 minutes to do this, so this is a quick thing, 10 observations about this. 10 things you notice that stand out to you that might tell part of this story. So not something simple like the guy has a white beard. Well, actually, you could put that. But no, I want more detail about what does this tell us about people, place, things, who, what, when, where, how, why. So think about those things. You're shooting for 10 as quickly as you can. 10 observations, and do it by yourself or with a partner. You have until 10:08. We'll give you 3.5 minutes to get this done. So it's not enough time to mess around. 10:08.
You want to type it? No. Okay. Don't worry.
Here's a store.
Just unplug guns. There's a ox in the back. It's like a pioneer perspective ox or wagon. Looks to be a fire on the other side.
That's a book. Here we go. There we go.
No, that was another
Smoke. Very.
One more minute. Macy, are you done? Are you done?
You'll need to unlock your iPhone first.
You're done?
We're done.
Okay. Maya, I need you. Come here. You guys finish up. I'm going to borrow Maya for a minute. I'll be right back. I promise.
Bye, Maya. Good luck. Don't die.
Okay, shut the door. Oh, I better turn off my mic because those losers are listening to us right now. I don't want them to hear what's going on in here.
Yo, what are they doing in there? Guys, what's the dog doing? Oxen, Oregon Trail. Fire. Angela, stop peeking. Oh, oh my god. Smoke. Yep. Thank you. They're in the car monitor. Poor face. No, they're dressing up. They're dressing up positively.
Never mind. Don't look. Don't worry.
Angela kept peeking through the windows. Close to Lena. They should get detention.
I know, but Angela's a cheater.
I know she is.
didn't tell anyone.
Yes, you did.
She's a cheater.
And
Never mind. It's a piece of a cat.
what? You skin the cat for that? You skinning cat.
Okay. We're almost ready to continue. Hopefully you've got your 10. Let's see. Aiden, come here.
Oh, jeez.
You see this guy right here?
Yeah.
That's you. Lay down.
Yeah.
Okay, hey, Ron, come here. You're this guy.
I want to be one. If somebody steps up.
Lay down right there.
Can I be one?
Oops, sorry.
Can I be the guy with the...
Okay, back to your own seats if you're not already there, please. If you don't have 10, you don't have 10. No big deal. Okay, John, come in.
Okay.
All right, you have to assume the pose.
She's stepping on Aiden's head. Yeah. Oh, and you're pointing at it.
Hold on. No, the other guy. Left foot.
Thank you.
Now hold still for a minute.
No.
That's actually pretty. How's that for a reenactment?
Love it. Beautiful.
Okay, Maya, you can go put the stuff back in the green suitcase, please.
Okay.
And you guys that died, you can get back up and go back to life. All right. That's one of the reasons I like that lesson. Because, okay, This guy's name is John Brown. I told you in the beginning that John Brown is an extreme abolitionist. That's all the information that you know about the guy. He hates slavery, so that's the clue that helps fill in part of what this image is about. Obviously, this is not a photograph. This is an artist's depiction, and you've seen this picture walking by the hallway every day. It's just a smaller version of it, maybe not the whole thing. By the way, all those posters in the hallway, that was like an end-of-the-year project where we had a few days. So how those were made is I divided the class up into like 6 or 8 groups. So there may be 3 people per group, 2 or 3. And each group had a section of the image that they had to draw and try to get it to match up with everybody else's section. And you can see most of them turned out pretty good. Pretty cool, actually. So we'll see if we end up doing that. But let's hear some of your observations about this. I heard some good discussion. I heard some things getting pointed out that don't necessarily always get pointed out. Give me one.
There are like slaves in the middle.
So where do you see slaves in the middle? I got an itch.
Right here.
Okay, good. I see that. Thank you. Someone else. Give me another one.
Both the north and the south flags are there.
What do you mean north and the south?
Like, for the Americans.
They have different flags?
Yeah, well, like, Civil War.
Oh, so you're seeing Civil War. We haven't studied the Civil War, so how do you know you're seeing the Civil War?
Well, because I know what the Civil
Because you know a little bit, right? Okay, that's good. So you're using some previous knowledge here. Which one's the south and which one's the north?
The one on the right is the south, and the one
On your right,
Yeah.
right? Okay, so the one that kind of almost looks like a British flag, right? That's the Confederate flag. What kind of?
if it was your right, you wouldn't be able to see it. So
My neck doesn't turn that far. What else do you see?
It looks like there's like a priest or a fancy dude on the left side.
you mean a priest?
On your left side?
Yes. The dude's like in the blue.
This guy? Is that who you're talking about? Any other observations about this man?
Looks like a priest.
Is he holding a Bible?
That's the big dude.
What color is this man?
No,
Yeah, he's a Smurf.
He looks really old.
He's purple.
Skin color?
He's white.
This guy?
He is.
He has an olive complexion.
Is he black?
He's a black man. You may or may not know that until I tell you the story, but which black man that we have already discussed would prominently be standing on the side of the U.S. flag, the North's flag, if we're going to use the Civil Wars? Who is this guy? Prominent black man that used politics to further the idea of abolition.
Martin Luther King Jr.
Quite a while after.
There were 3 black people in the last chapter that we talked about that were sort of superheroes for their race. Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, and Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass. So that is Frederick Douglass in our picture. What else? Give me some more observations.
there's like a tornado on the left side and then like a fire on the right.
What do you think that has to do with anything? Why do you think whoever created this piece of art put a tornado and a fire in there?
They were in California.
They're both symbolic or symbolism of destruction. Fires and tornadoes destroy lots of stuff. Do you think this gives us any idea of place?
California.
Along with maybe some of the other clues in this picture. Why Midwest?
Because there's only there's 20 more.
Yeah, there's tornadoes everywhere, but we have tornadoes. Kansas has tornadoes. Oklahoma has more so than everyone else. I don't know why I'm not that smart, but yeah, okay. What's the fire have to do with the Midwest? In the old days, one of the reasons why trees rarely ever grew on the plains is because the grass would grow to 4 feet tall or 6 feet tall, and then it would die, and then the next years would grow up, and then it would die, and then after about, I think they say on average about every 7 to 15 years, there would be a lightning strike which would create a prairie fire and burn everything off. Hugely destructive, but also in the wake of the destruction of a prairie fire, what happens? rebirth, the growth is beautiful. If you see where a fire has burned a ditch, weeks after it's just black and charred, it turns beautiful and green, and we see something fresh and new. So sometimes there's value in burning off a field. What else? Aaron?
Oxen and wagons.
Okay, what is that telling us? Does that have something to do with place? And maybe time?
Along the Oregon Trail, maybe.
Could be. Which direction do you think they're moving?
Away from each other.
West. So this is setting both the kind of a time period and a place for us, looking at those details that are really, really easy to gloss over. Anything else? Okay, so Maya was standing on, whose head was Maya standing on? Aiden's head. Who are the two dead guys? How about that? One's Union and one's Confederate. So again, you have to have a little prior knowledge about the Civil War to know that. Which one's Union? Union's north. The blue. So whose head is John Brown standing on? Confederate. If he's an abolitionist, does it make sense that he's standing on the head of a Confederate soldier? How about the man himself? He's gigantic. Is that realistic in his giganticism? I mean, compared to the guy that's standing right next to him or slightly behind him, he would appear to be twice the size of a normal human. Is that real? Or is there a reason why they made John Brown appear to be twice the size of a normal human? Yeah, maybe.
Maybe he's a baller.
Do you think maybe the artist is trying to make this man look bigger than life? Yes. What about the book in his left hand? I heard somebody say at least what their theory was about that book. It is the Bible.
Looks like a map, though.
You can see it as a map. And part of the reason why you can tell that it's a Bible, and this is a little bit more of a stretch, and you have to have a little bit more background knowledge to get this. If you look, there are two symbols on his Bible, and they're kind of hard to see. One is called the Alpha, and one is called the Omega, the beginning and the end. And that's kind of the story of the Bible. So in one hand, he's got a Bible, and in the other hand, he's got a gun. That's pretty easy for us to see. Do those two things seem to go together? They shouldn't, but oftentimes in history they do. You know, so like one of the ways if there's a draft that you've been able to historically get out of the draft is to prove that you're a pacifist. So Quakers, Shakers, those people don't have to serve in the military because they can prove that their religion precludes them from fighting. But if you're Catholic or Lutheran, whatever, I'll use Catholicism as an example, and this is not intended to be, I'm not picking on anybody, it's just an example. If you're Catholic, does your Bible say you're not supposed to kill anyone? Yeah, it's pretty clear. So ultimately, could a Catholic person, or anybody that uses that Bible, go to the draft board and say, my Bible says I can't kill? The draft board will laugh at you and say, ha, ha, ha. Because the draft board knows a little bit about history. And did you guys study the Crusades in world history last year?
Maybe a little.
Crusades was a Catholic event where they went out and captured and destroyed and fought to spread Catholicism. So the draft board would look at you if you're Catholic and say, good try, but your religion has fought wars in the past for religion, so you're still going to fight. But they don't usually seem to go together. You'd think that a guy that's very biblical wouldn't have a gun in his hand looking. And by the way, the look on his face, you going to mess with him?
No.
Do you think this is the kind of guy you want to hang out with on weekends?
He looks like
Kind of guy.
he's
He looks like a
Really? I don't think I want to because he's gigantic. In fact, if I look at the guy, I'm thinking, I think I want to be on his side. Because he's gigantic and he looks like he could shoot you really easily. Okay, so this is John Brown. This is telling us the story of Bleeding Kansas. And I'm going to come into greater detail on that in a little bit. But the picture tells a great story of what's going on. And it's going to be a prelude to John Brown as an extreme abolitionist. But what I want to ask you now, Well, no, I'll ask you in a little bit. So I want you to ponder this as I tell you stories about this guy, both today and maybe next week. I'm going to ask you, looking at this picture, well, I guess I can ask you now and then I'll ask you again later. Is John Brown, the big man in the picture, based on his appearance, a terrorist? Or here's a new word for you, a martyr. Only based on what we see, the evidence that's given to us. First of all, let's get some definitions. What is a terrorist? You can't use the word terror in defining terrorist.
Why not?
What does a terrorist do? Attacks people that are typically innocent. It's not a warrior. Warriors attack other warriors, but a warrior that attacks a preschool or a gigantic building in New York City, that's a terrorist. Has anybody even heard of the word martyr? Do you know what that means?
No.
A martyr is someone who dies for a cause greater than themselves. So a martyr is sacrifices their life for something they believe is critically important. Can a terrorist and a martyr be the same thing? What did you say? How so? You're right, but explain. She says, for those of you watching on the video side, she says on certain occasions. How could it possibly be that a martyr, who seems, that seems like a good thing, right? Someone who dies for a cause greater than themselves. How could a martyr possibly be seen as a terrorist? Okay. The men who flew the planes into the World Trade Towers, martyrs or terrorists?
Depends on what your view is.
Perspective depends on what your view is. To us, martyrs are terrorists. Terrorists. That's horrible. They attacked two gigantic buildings full of innocent people who most likely didn't cause anybody. There were probably some bad guys in there too, but they killed innocent people that weren't soldiers. They weren't warriors. They were daycares in those places, for crying out loud. They are terrorists. Could they also be seen as martyrs, dying for a cause greater than themselves? When they flew those planes into the World Trade Towers, did they know they were going to die? So they knew they were sacrificing themselves. Who would see them as martyrs? The people that they represented. So can you be both? Yes. Can you think of an example of, oftentimes we think of a martyr as someone who is stronger in death than they were alive also? Can you think of any more modernish examples of people who are probably more powerful because they were killed than if they would have survived? I think you're probably right, because in reality, and I'm not trying to upset anybody, but what was George Floyd as a regular, everyday person? What? A father? Is that what you said? I thought you said a flower. I'm like, what? How is he a flower? Yeah, he's a father. Regular, ordinary guy that way, right? Nothing special about him. Might have been a bit of a thief, and he had a past of some drug use. Again, those aren't reasons to kill a man. But he wasn't super shiny, squeaky clean. Is that a fair assumption that we can make? None of us really are super shiny, squeaky clean, but that doesn't mean we deserve to die. So yeah, maybe. Had George Floyd not died, would anybody have noticed if he just lived a regular life and passed away like the rest of us? No, but because he was killed. That's an interesting one. Nobody's ever brought that one up. But because he was killed, does he leave a bigger mark? There are others that are pretty obvious too. Martin Luther King Jr., superpower in history. If MLK wouldn't have been assassinated, would he have been, or would he be as big of a deal in our history? I don't know. Would he though? I mean, would he be as famous? Would we be telling stories about the guy if he would? I don't know. I mean, we don't know that because we didn't get to live that version of history. It was a big deal, and he was popular and famous. but I don't know for sure. Or the ultimate, if you're a religious person, and again, you don't have to be a religious person, but who's the ultimate martyr? Someone who sacrifices themselves for something greater. Yeah, if you're a religious person, it's Jesus. I'm not teaching religion. I'm just using examples that are easy for us to understand. So when we look at John Brown, this guy looks. By the way, anybody want to speculate why the guy has a crazy looking beard? It wasn't because he liked beards. Wasn't because he was a mountain man, but that's a good guess because all mountain men had cool beards. He was hiding his identity. He didn't grow a beard until the end of his life. And the end of his life is early-ish because, well, he gets caught doing something terroristy. But as a result, becomes a martyr. So anyway, we're going in that direction. What we see as a result of those border ruffians, those Missourians sneaking into Kansas and casting their votes, they sack the city of Lawrence, Kansas. That just means they go in and they steal and they plunder and they pillage. Again, people that have a cause that they think is important to them, promoting slavery in the state or the territory of Kansas, and it gets out of control and they go in and start robbing and stealing. We might see examples of that today when protesters go into cities and try to, they start out by properly protesting, not harming anyone, and then pretty soon everyone's robbing the Nike store. Has nothing to do with their protest, but free shoes sounds good. So that kind of happens in Lawrence, Kansas. So John Brown gets angry and attacks along with a small group of people and massacres or kills 5 pro-slave neighbors. So John Brown is now a criminal and has to go into hiding because even if you're doing something for the right reason, even if you're killing for what you believe is a great cause, it's against the law to take another person's life. So anyway, there's this bleeding Kansas mentality that Kansas is falling apart because of this. So he's not afraid to use violence to rid the United States of slavery. It's the opposite of when we talk about Martin Luther King Jr. That guy didn't want to use any violence. He found ways to peacefully protest. Both very, very powerful ways to protest, very powerful ways to gain attention, but the violence is probably a lot easier to get attention. If you're a peaceful protester, does anybody pay attention to you in the news? I guess maybe a little bit. If you're watching the news now, those truckers in Canada are getting a lot of attention. And they're not harming anybody. They're probably harming jobs in the economy of Canada. If you don't pay any attention to that at all, the truckers are, from my understanding, they're really ticked off about mask mandates and stuff like that. So they're created a convoy and they head to Quebec and they just sort of stopped working. Sort of like a strike. Are they harming anyone? They haven't killed anyone. Should they be allowed to do it? I think. Because they're not harming anyone. So violence is a way to prove your point. So is peacefulness. He tried to arm slaves in a revolt. So if I give you a little background on John Brown, I'll tell you, this guy's cuckoo anyway. But I like to talk about him because he's maybe one of the most interesting guys that there is. He was raised super religious. His intention was to go to, he wanted to be a minister, but his family ran out of money. So he couldn't go to seminary. If you ever heard the word seminary, that means school to be a priest. So he couldn't get the education that he needed. He was born in 1800. At the age of 35, he had this feeling that he needed to do something about slavery. So in 1835, so we don't get rid of slavery until 1865. So he's early on this bandwagon of abolition. He knows that he's got to devote his life to getting rid of slavery. By 1856, John Brown and his sons murdered 5 men in pro-slave Kansas. None of the men that he murdered actually owned any slaves. They just were in favor of slavery. So there's a question mark as to whether, well, we know they didn't deserve to die. Nobody deserves to die for their opinion. Then later on, he's going to attack an arsenal at a place called Harper's Ferry in Virginia. Remind me, what's an arsenal? where you hold all your weapons. So we used to have an arsenal in the back corner where we kept all our guns. I'm just kidding for anybody that's watching this. We never actually had any guns here. But Jace took them to the pawn shop and sold them all, so we don't even have an arsenal anymore. But he... Oh, yeah, because that's not Jace's spot. Jace just forgot to charge his Chromebook, the ding-dong. Apparently they don't have electricity in his house. So he could have charged it in the car, maybe. Now then it would have froze. Never mind. So he attacks an arsenal at a place called Harper's Ferry in Virginia. This is after Bleeding Kansas. Here's his plan. If he takes this group of men, 22 men, to this federal arsenal and captures it, 22 men including 3 of his sons, then eventually he'll have all of these guns, and all of the slaves in the neighboring area will hear about this arsenal being captured, and all of the slaves in this area will come running to the arsenal. They will get the guns from John Brown and his men, and they will start their own little war fighting for freedom. They'll just ravage the South, freeing slaves as they go. He thinks he's going to build a slave army. He captures the arsenal, defeats the military that's protecting it, and nobody shows up. So his idea is kind of a bust. By the way, how's he get where he's at? Well, he's kind of a failure in life. Like, he tried opening a tannery. A tannery is where you take cowhide or animal skin and turn it into leather. Tanneries are stinky places with caustic chemicals that will burn off your fingers, and they're nasty. And if you're a tanner, you would always smell horrible. There's no way to get the stink off of you. It's a hard job, but they usually make a lot of money. So I had a buddy when I was working on a farm. He was a hog farmer, and I worked with him sometimes. His family and the family of my farmer worked together quite often, sharing labor and sharing equipment. And he's a super nice guy, but he had, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of hogs, and he smelled like a pig. And he was a clean guy, but he couldn't get it off of him. And one time I had to use his pickup truck. Oh my gosh, it's like, oh, this stinks. COVID's cured that for me. He failed at the tannery business, so he decided to raise cattle, and all of his cows died. Then he opened a post office and failed at that, and then he tried to open a school, and he failed at that. He married a woman named Diantha Lusk. That was his first wife. She gave birth to 7 children. Died giving birth to number 7. Within a matter of 2 weeks, he's remarried to her best friend. Now, yeah, we laugh at that, but that was actually very, very common in the 1800s, because if you have 7 children, you need a mama for those children. And because people didn't have like apps on their phone to date, you need a mama now. You can't wait a couple years and go find another woman. So John Brown's going after a woman that he already knows. And who does he know? His wife's bestie. So he marries Mary Ann Day. How am I doing on time? Okay, I'll wrap this up and then we'll finish later. He marries a woman named Mary Ann Day, his wife's bestie. They have 13 children together. So John Brown had 20 kids. Only 10 of his 20 kids lived to adulthood, which isn't that uncommon. It's probably not bad for that time, a half, 50%. Okay, so thank you for paying attention. We will wrap up John Brown, and then we'll talk about violence in Congress next week on Tuesday.